On August 6, 2025, U.S. President Donald Trump stunned the world by slapping a sweeping 25% tariff on all Indian imports, a move that sent shockwaves through global markets and diplomatic circles alike. With this action, the total tariff burden on Indian goods soared to a staggering 50%, doubling overnight and catching businesses on both sides off guard. This is the highest tariff the U.S. has ever imposed on a single nation, instantly shattering years of careful diplomacy and trust built between the world's two largest democracies. India now faces just 3 weeks before these tariffs take effect, putting a $212 billion trade relationship at risk and threatening thousands of jobs and livelihoods. Only months ago, both nations were celebrating a new era of partnership, with leaders touting unprecedented cooperation. Now, that optimism has all but vanished, replaced by uncertainty and suspicion. India's response was swift and defiant, as government officials convened emergency meetings and the nation braced for economic turbulence. Prime Minister Modi declared that India would never compromise its farmers, vowing to defend the nation's economic autonomy and dignity at any cost, rallying public support across the country. This isn't just a trade dispute, it's a fundamental challenge to India's sovereignty and a test of its resolve on the world stage. President Trump, once a vocal champion of India's economic rise, now calls its economy dead and threatens to penalize U.S. companies for expanding operations in India, escalating tensions further. The relationship, once a pillar of Indo-Pacific stability and a model for international cooperation, is now at its lowest point in years, with both sides digging in. The tariff hammer has fallen, and its shockwaves will not only disrupt trade, but also reshape global alliances and economic strategies for years to come, leaving the world to watch what happens next. Why did the U.S. take such drastic action? What drove Washington to make a move that could risk its relationship with one of the world's fastest-growing economies? Officially, it's India's continued purchase of discounted Russian oil. Despite mounting pressure, India has kept buying, arguing it needs affordable energy for its massive population and growing economy. Washington claims India is funding Moscow's war in Ukraine, undermining the global coalition against Russia. U.S. officials argue that every dollar spent on Russian oil helps prolong the conflict and weakens international efforts to isolate Moscow. The U.S. frames the tariffs as a penalty for betraying shared democratic values. It's a message to India and to the world that economic choices have political consequences. Russia's share of India's oil imports soared from under 1% to over 30% in just 3 years, providing India with vital, affordable energy. This dramatic shift has made Russia a key supplier, changing the balance of global energy flows. The U.S. sees every barrel as fueling Russia's war machine. For Washington, it's not just about economics. It's about the moral and strategic costs of enabling Russia. Negotiations broke down over agriculture. America demanded access to India's vast markets, but India refused, protecting millions of small farmers. This deadlock added to the growing list of disputes between the two countries. President Trump also threatened more tariffs if India deepens ties with the BRICS bloc, revealing deeper anxieties about rising alternative power centers. The U.S. worries that BRICS could challenge its dominance in global finance and trade. BRICS is working to create parallel financial systems and promote trade in local currencies. This could reduce the influence of the U.S. dollar and shift the global economic order. These tariffs are more than a response to oil. They're a warning shot at the idea of a multipolar world. Washington wants to remind others that challenging its leadership comes with a price. The U.S.-India rift is about power, not just policy. At its core, it's a struggle over who gets to shape the rules of the global order in the years ahead. India's response was loud and clear, echoing across the nation and the world. The message was unmistakable. The U.S. tariffs are unfair, unjustified, and unreasonable, targeting India's economic interests without proper cause. The Ministry of External Affairs made it clear that India would not be bullied or pressured and was prepared to fight back on the global stage, defending its rights and reputation. Prime Minister Modi's declaration to defend India's economic autonomy transformed the dispute into a matter of national pride, uniting people from all walks of life. By invoking the struggles and resilience of Indian farmers, he rallied public support, framing any hardship as a necessary sacrifice for the nation's sovereignty and future prosperity. India dismantled the U.S. justification, pointing out that its Russian oil purchases were a direct result of Western sanctions and the rapidly shifting global energy markets, not a deliberate act of defiance. After 2022, as Middle Eastern suppliers diverted oil to Europe, India was forced to seek new sources to meet its growing energy needs and keep its economy running. India reminded Washington that, in fact, previous U.S. officials had encouraged these purchases to help stabilize global prices and prevent further economic shocks. India's actions are pragmatic, not defiant, rooted in its long-standing policy of strategic autonomy and careful decision-making. For decades, India has skillfully balanced relationships with competing powers, buying Russian oil while engaging the U.S. and other global partners to protect its interests. Energy security is a non-negotiable national interest for India, essential for its development and stability. India's firm stance is unwavering. Its economic independence is not up for negotiation, and it will continue to chart its own path on the world stage. India quickly called out Western double standards. While the U.S. criticizes India for buying Russian oil, it continues to import Russian fertilizers and enriched uranium. Several EU countries still consume Russian energy, despite public sanctions. This exposes the hypocrisy of sanctioning India while protecting Western interests. India asks, why penalize us for actions the West itself takes? This narrative resonates across the global South, fueling the belief that the global order favors the powerful. By exposing these double standards, India is challenging the fairness of the international system. The trade war is now a global debate about equity and the right to independent development. The world is watching the U.S.-India trade war closely. China, with its own history of U.S. trade disputes, quickly backed India's right to energy sovereignty and condemned U.S. economic blackmail. Russia echoed this, framing the tariffs as another example of U.S. hegemony. Beijing and Moscow are using the crisis to push for a multipolar world order. Across the global South, many see India's stand as their own, resisting Western economic pressure. There's growing talk of India leading a new bloc of nations challenging the current economic system. If India withstands U.S. pressure, it could inspire others to assert their independence. Meanwhile, the U.S. is strengthening ties with Pakistan, signing new trade deals and exploring oil agreements. This strategic realignment adds volatility to South Asia's already tense landscape. The fallout is global, not just bilateral. With tariffs looming, India faces three choices: retaliation, realignment, or self-reliance. Retaliation means slapping tariffs on U.S. goods, sending a message, but risking escalation. Realignment involves deepening ties with the EU, ASEAN, and BRICS, and fast-tracking trade deals elsewhere. India and China have already agreed to resume direct flights, signaling a thaw. Modi's upcoming visit to the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit in China will be closely watched. The boldest path is doubling down on Atmanirbhar Bharat, making India a global manufacturing hub and reducing import dependence. Apple's plan to assemble all U.S. market iPhones in India by 2026 shows this is possible. India's likely response, a mix of all three: retaliation, new alliances, and a push for self-sufficiency. The challenge is to show strength without harming its own economy. The next few weeks will define not just U.S.-India ties, but India's economic future. The world is watching New Delhi's next move. This conflict is about more than oil or tariffs. It's a battle for India's sovereignty and its place in the world. The U.S. tariffs are seen as a direct challenge to India's right to make independent decisions. For decades, India has balanced relations with rival powers. Now, that balance is under threat. Washington's ultimatum is forcing India to choose between affordable energy and its U.S. partnership. India's fierce response is a declaration: it will not be a subordinate ally. The outcome will send a message to all emerging economies. Can a rising power hold its ground? The global South is watching, seeing India's fight as a proxy battle for their own sovereignty. The risks are high. A trade war could harm both economies and unravel years of progress, but backing down could compromise India's independence for decades. The question remains: should India hold the line or seek a truce?